Hey there. Welcome back to my place.
Hey there. Our next verse is the infamous Isaiah 14:12. The so-called expert claims that the KJV rightly includes Lucifer, but the evil other translations, all New Age and spawned by Satan, to create a new world order, that these other translations evilly substitute morning star for Lucifer, thus making Satan get the Lord's own morning star title.
Looks like our expert doesn't even know what Lucifer means. Lucifer is Latin and means morning star or shining one. The LXX translates it that way. Hebrew in the real Bible for that word is Halel. So the other versions just translated the Hebrew into English, whereas the KJV translated the Hebrew Halel equals morning star into the Latin Lucifer from the Vulgate.
Woohoo, woohoo. Looks like Satan sponsors the expert, since the expert clearly never learned kindergarten Latin. I think I should throw a book-burning party.
Do it here. On the house.
Next verse, Acts 17:22. The NIV is accused of mistranslating Greek deisidaimon, which has a positive meaning of being religious and a negative meaning of being superstitious. The KJV translators opted for the latter meaning, and the NIV opted for the former.
If the so-called expert looked at the next verse, Acts 17:23, it would become obvious that Paul is using the nice sense of the word, since the Athenians also have a statue to what Paul will explain is the real God. So Paul is urging them to worship, but rather to worship the true God, not the false ones.
I understand. If he was saying they were too superstitious, then why should they worship at all? So he is saying their religion is misplaced. Not that they should have none.
So the expert is not very good at reading English, either. Next verse in the list.
Colossians 2:18. Here the accusation made is that the KJV properly says, visions which he have not seen, but the evil Satan spawned other translations say, visions which he has seen. When I looked at the Greek, all the later copies have has not seen, but all the earlier copies say has seen.
That one is easy to solve. The Textus Receptus inserts late Greek into the text. Paul's sarcasm in 1st century Greek required the insertion of not in late Greek.
I don't understand.
Well, in 1st century Greek, to say not seen would require Greek word book with the participle. But in later Greek, it was changed to Greek word may. That is what happened here in Colossians 2:18 and many other verses in the Bible. Basically, as new copies were made during Byzantine times, the scribes modernized the words, in effect translating them, rather than preserving the original words God gave the writers.
So Paul's sarcasm required leaving out the not when he wrote the verse.
Yes. So technically, the meaning of either the KJV or the other translations is the same. Paul denies that someone saw visions, but the Textus Receptus did not preserve Paul's sarcasm properly. So the KJV translation is less correct. The NIV and similar translations better preserve what God gave Paul to say for this verse in the Bible.
Well, the next three accusations are complete lies. The accuser claims that the newer translations include the Shepherd of Hermas and the Epistle of Barnabas as Bible books. But none of the newer translations claim those false books are Bible.
Correct. The expert apparently never took a course in linguistics. It is important to preserve all books of a period in order to date the age of a language. Here, all of the books written in 1st century Greek are important, so we know how the Greek was used. So the fake Bible books were preserved, so one could verify what was the language, not to claim that the books themselves were holy.
Our next verse in the list of accusations is Mark 10:21. Here, the accuser expert claims that the KJV properly inserts "take up his cross," but the satanic newer translations omit the phrase.
That phrase is a lay Greek insertion. It is added to the end of the verse, so the mistake is very obvious. Obvious too, since when Christ is talking to the rich man, no cross had happened yet. His death by cross was not predicted back then. Some Byzantine scribe made that up. Religious legalism. Bane of Christianity.
The next verse is 2 Peter 1:21. Here, the allegation made is that the KJV properly says holy men, but the satanic newer translations just say men.
More religious legalism. The KJV inserts holy into the English translation, but it is nowhere in the Greek texts, not even in the Textus Receptus. Nor does the Vulgate for that verse say that the men themselves are holy. The KJV people just made it up.
So the KJV adds to the word of God a claim God does not make. Next verse is 1 Peter 1:22. The accuser says that 2 Peter 1:22 should say pure men, but the evil, Satan-inspired newer translations just say men. I think I smell an agenda here.
We always serve high-voltage food. Hope you enjoy it. Yes, the agenda is to claim that the men themselves are pure of heart. Bible never makes that claim. It is another lay Greek insertion, so the KJV use of pure is wrong.
The next verse is 2 Timothy 3:17. There, the accuser claims the KJV properly says perfect, whereas the Satan-inspired newer translations merely say adequate. When I looked up the word in the Greek, I realized that the KJV translation is clearly wrong, as we are not perfect.
Correct. That should be obvious to anyone reading the KJV in English. Thus we know the accuser should not be called a professor, as even a 5-year-old child would know that the verse cannot mean perfect. Not even the Catholics claim anyone can become perfect after salvation.
But the word adequate seems wrong also. Greek word is artios. The word means completely equipped, or matooyo. So isn't the NIV also wrong?
Well, the NIV is right. It uses thoroughly equipped. The NASB uses adequate, which is not the best translation. Mature would be a better translation. In any event, the KJV translation of perfect is wrong.
Our next verse is Proverbs 21:21. The accuser claims that the KJV rightly translates the verse with righteousness, but the so-called satanic newer translations mistranslate the same word as prosperity.
Well, the Hebrew tzedakah in that verse does connote the prosperity God grants for living according to his standard. The context is material prosperity in verse 20, and bravery prosperity in verse 22. So perhaps righteous prosperity would be a better translation in the NIV than simply prosperity. So the KJV and the NASB should also add the word prosperity to their translations to properly reflect the context.
Our next verse is Jeremiah 29:11. Here, the accuser claims that the KJV translation of peace is superior to the satanically inspired newer translation of prosperity. But when I looked up the Hebrew, the two meanings are the same. Seems to me that prosperity is the better translation, as Jeremiah is talking to people who are already saved.
Correct. Prosperity is the meaning God intended, as proven from the words in the verse, and in the surrounding context. God speaks a promise of restoring Israel to the land. It is not about salvation, but about prosperity of relationship with Him. But the KJV translates the Hebrew shalom as peace everywhere it occurs, because its philosophy of translation is to translate the same Hebrew word with the same English word even when the context begs for a different word in English. They chose that philosophy because the audience for the KJV were pastors who used the original language texts and the Latin. So they would use an English translation to track to the original. The KJV was never intended to replace the original text.
Really? That is the reverse from the claim made by KJV only people.
Well, the KJV only people don't know anything about Bible's history.
We must go for now. See you later.
Yes, after I close up